You know, when I was growing up back in the 80s, hey, I know that's a long time ago, but that's when I was your age. If you're like 11 or 12, that's the 80s is when I was that, okay? And the 80s are amazing. Like, we're going back to the 80s with stuff, aren't we? Words like hipster and all these others are coming back and just filling up. Whoa! The falling of the lectern. Thank you, girls. Thank you for doing that. I don't need the notes, do I now? I don't really need my notes. Let's do no notes tonight. There we go. No notes. All right. Common sayings in the 80s. Let me tell you a couple of the common sayings. We're looking at forgotten words, okay? One of the common sayings is bookin'. Like if you're bookin', like you had your foot to the metal in the car and you go, man, I'm bookin'. You probably don't hear that today. Another word that you would hear is choice. I remember the teacher said, children, it is Friday and there is no homework, and we'll go, choice. Probably means nothing to you. Another word, sick, man. Like, you know, you'd have the ball and the PE teacher says, now kick it between the posts, and you'd go, whoo, in his face, and everyone goes, oh, sick, man, you got the teacher in the head. Another word from the 80s is fab. You know, mum and dad would say, son, we love you so much, we don't want you to do chores this weekend. You'd walk away and go, fab. It's cool. A couple of words that weren't really helpful. Dag. Now, you'd call someone dag who just was, you know, didn't have it all together, probably not as handsome as yourself. Because what a dag is like the little poo that hangs off the sheet's butt, and you call that person a dag. So it's not a nice word. That's why I put it in red. But in the 80s, you didn't like someone, you say, you dag. And that was like really offensive, really offensive. These are forgotten words. But you know when you go, oh, another one, nuts. You heard of that one? This is a bad word, but depends where you were. If you're with your friends and someone did something crazy, like they rang the doorbell in the middle of the night of their neighbour, and everyone ran around to their own house and hid behind the fence, and the neighbour comes out and looks, and you wait 10 minutes, and you go again, and you do it again, and you ring it, and everyone goes, oh, Chris, you're so nuts, and you go, yeah, of course I am. But when you didn't like someone who wasn't your friend, and you go, man, you're nuts. In other words, they just don't have it all together. They're lost. They're like, you know, like that. Nuts. So you had to be careful when you use that. Have the right audience. Some forgotten sayings. You know, there are some common sayings in the Bible that are forgotten words. Let me share one of them with you. Sin. Now, all of you here, most of you know. Does anyone want to give us an explanation what sin is? A teenager. Yeah, tell us. Round of applause. That's basically it. Anything we do, think, or say that is contrary to the way God would have us live. That's a basic summary of sin. And here in Northreach, we've tried to summarize Bible words that are forgotten words into common, everyday, Kerwinian language. So when you walk around Kerwin, you say, sin, and they go, yeah, anything you do, think, or say that's contrary to the way that God wants you to live. You go, huh? You can tell your friends, you know, some forgotten words. Another one, righteous. It's a more difficult one. I have to explain two words tonight before I start preaching. First one is righteous. Let me tell you what it is. If you look up Google, the free dictionary on Google, you get this. Of a person or conduct, morally right or justifiable, virtuous. Second part is perfectly wonderful, fine, and genuine. Synonym, words that are like it, just, right, upright, rightful, fair, and honest. All that summarizes me. Righteous. So that's a word we're going to find out tonight. We're going to use a couple of times. However, righteous is not the following. So if we watch this YouTube clip, that would be awesome. Thanks, Nick. We get that YouTube click on. This is not what righteous is. Let's have a look. If we go back to those slides, righteous is not that. Okay, let me explain what righteous, we already saw it. Righteous is Something to do with moral conduct, nothing to do with a Hungry Jack's burger. Hands up if you prefer Hungry Jack's over Macca's. Okay, I do. Sometimes. Fridays, I like Macca's, but I take all our leaders to Hungry Jack's just to punish them. And during the week, I don't mind Hungry Jack's because there's not many people in the queues. You get food quicker. Anyway, it's got nothing to do with what we're talking about because we're free from our notes. They're down there. Common sayings in the Bible justified. Here's another one, and then we're going to get into a talk and have lots of fun, okay? Common saying is justified. Let me explain. If you Google it, again, you'll get this for free on Google. In the 80s, there was no such thing as Google, okay? I can't tell you that story. It's a ridiculous story about my son, and he's sick, and he won't hear it because he's over there in bed lying, going, Dad, I'm dying. I'll tell you the story anyway. You can tell him if you go to school. He goes, Dad! We're at my parents' house in Sydney, right? And he goes, Dad, your dad must be a really good reader. I go, what? Your pop? And he goes, yeah. I go, why? And he goes, he's got all these books, and they're like in this glass cupboard. I said, son, that's an encyclopedia. He goes, what's that? I said, before Google, if you didn't know something, you went to the dictionary, and if you couldn't find it there, you'd go into these 30 books, open up this glass cabinet, look alphabetically till you found the word, and there it was, the answer for what you're looking for. He goes, no way. Never mind, son. You can pick him up next time. See, he's not drumming, he's really sick. Justified on Google for free. Free dictionary says, having done for or marked by a good or legitimate reason, the doctors are justified in their treating her. That's one way of saying it. But I've highlighted the second one. Declared or made righteous in the sight of God. Words that are similar to it is legitimate, justifiable, just, valid. Back in the 80s when I was driving my Tirana, it was hotted up. I showed you a picture of it once before in a sermon here. If you weren't here, you missed out. I had a number plate that said, just try. Because, see, I'd sit at the lights, and if some dude would come back with his car going, doo, doo, and he'll look at my number plate, I'm saying to them, just try. We'll have a race and see who wins. But I'm going to win because I got the bigger motor, the bigger tires, the bigger car. Just try. Has nothing to do with justified, if you're back in the 80s. But it said just try. Nothing to do with it. Justified. Last week, we learnt now. Let's get into this talk. Last week, we learnt that no one will be righteous by keeping the law. However, righteousness has come without having to do good deeds. So someone can become righteous without having to do anything good. This is quite remarkable. The Bible says in Romans 3:21-23, it says, but now a righteousness from God apart from the law has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. The righteousness of God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. In other words, before Jesus Christ went to the cross and he died and he resurrected again, all the prophets before Jesus Christ were saying one day there is coming a guy who is God-man. He's perfect and he's going to come and die for the sins of the world. In fact, you can read even in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, which is thousands of years before Jesus comes, it starts to point to this person, Jesus. Even in the songbooks in the Bible, which is called Psalms, there's heaps of songs that talk about this man, God, who's going to come like Jesus Christ and die for the sins of the world. So what it's saying here, that righteousness, to be in a right standing with God, has come right now in the 21st century, back when Jesus died for our sins and was resurrected. And you don't have to do good things to get in a right relationship with God. God did this justified, this righteousness for us, so he could prove something, a couple of things. The first thing, he would provide a sacrifice for us. So he wanted to provide the sacrifice. I want you to imagine God as your dad, but a perfect dad. I didn't have a perfect dad, but imagine you have a perfect dad. If we could reboot those slides again, that'd be awesome. God saw the broken needs of the world, and so much like a good father, he thought, I am going to fix this, because if I don't fix this, no one will be able to fix it. And so God chooses to have a son, and his son is Jesus Christ. And he chooses to send his son to a cross. Now, we share this over and over again because it's so important for us to understand this. God sends his son to the cross. In a sense, he sacrifices his best, his most important thing in heaven, his most precious thing in heaven. It's his son, Jesus Christ. Now, I want you to think about all the precious things you have. Now imagine you had to say the most precious thing you had to give it away to someone you don't really have a relationship with, you don't really know, you're never going to see it ever again, but you're going to give it away to them because you simply love them. That's how good your God and my God is. He is really good. In fact, He is so good, He's perfect. And He's our Father in heaven. He's our Dad in heaven, and He wants to restore us back to Him. So He did this righteousness, this justification, to prove to us He's the only one that can, and He was going to give up His Son to do it for us. Now, I want you to think about that. God has made a plan for you to be right with God. And the only way we can actually get into that right relationship is hear the story of Jesus. Once we hear that story of Jesus Christ, is actually respond to that story of Jesus Christ. And how we respond to that story of Jesus Christ is actually faith. The Bible calls it faith. We actually trust that God is able to do what He promises He's going to do. God promised before, like I said, before Jesus died, thousands of years before Jesus came to the earth, that He will send His messenger, and that messenger one day would eventually die for you and I so that we could be forgiven. See, what God does is this. He allows His Son, His greatest possession, His blood, His life, for your life. He gives it in an exchange. Jesus' life for your life. The Bible talks a lot about Jesus' blood because it's royal blood. It's blood that comes from heaven. It's God's blood. And Jesus, the ultimate sacrifice, who is God Himself, His blood had to be spilt out of His body. The reason why the Bible tells us is simple. Because when you drain the blood out of someone's body, that person is clinically dead. That person dies. And Jesus had to go to this cross. He had a spear shoved in His side. He was wounded. He was broken. His blood was poured out. His life was poured out for you and I. God planned to do this from the beginning, to give the ultimate love sacrifice for you and I. So right now you might be thinking, no one really cares about me. No one really loves me. Don't ever, ever, ever believe that. You have a Dad in heaven who absolutely adores you. He adores you. You may think, but Christian, you don't know. I've done a lot of bad things. It doesn't matter. He absolutely, ridiculously adores you. How do I know? He gave His greatest possession for you, for me, His Son. It's His greatest possession. Jesus Christ in heaven is the central thing. Everyone goes to Jesus now and bows down and says, man, you are amazing. You are magnificent. When I was on earth before I died, Jesus, these are people that have died a long time ago, I thought you were great. But now that I see you, you're freaking awesome. You are so good, Jesus. I wish I knew more of you while I was on earth. Righteousness has come through good deeds. If we get that clicker going, that'd be awesome. Great, thank you. Let's flick it to the next slide, and if someone could just get this thing happening, that'd be awesome. Thank you very much. So there we have that. Can we just even press it to the next slide? Thank you. So this is a verse in Romans 3:25-6. God presented Him, Jesus Christ, as a sacrifice, an atonement through faith in His blood. He did this to demonstrate His justice, because in His forbearance, in other words, in Jesus, in God's patience, He had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. So everyone before Jesus Christ, their sins weren't punished yet. But after Jesus' death and resurrection, they can be. And God, He did it to demonstrate His justice, that God is right, He's perfect at this present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who believe, who have faith in Jesus Christ. Now, we've discovered we can be in a right relationship with God by just trusting Him. Now, my life is filled with Christians. Some people say that I live in a Christian bubble. My life is so filled with Christians that I even live on this church property. Do you believe that? I can't get enough of it. I live on the property. So I wake up and I just take 45 steps and I'm in my office. And I go, wow, that was a long walk, lots of traffic. Let me ask you this question. Is there any room for followers of Christ to say, wow, look at me, I am a faithful follower of Jesus, admire me? Is there any room for that? What about, is there any room for Christians who follow Jesus Christ, followers of Christ, to say, look how strong and courageous I am as I serve God in worship team? Is there any room for Christians to say that, followers of Jesus? What about, look how good I am as I speak as a preacher with such authority? Is there any room for Christians to say that? How about, look how pure I am. I have never even touched another person in my life. Can Christians say that? I haven't even imagined what it feels like to kiss someone. I'm so pure. But I have a son. That doesn't make sense. What about, look at me. I'm such a committed Jesus fan. Everything about me is Jesus. Even my shoes, they're red, like the blood of Jesus. Is there any room for us to boast this way? What about, how determined am I? It was jeans for Jesus. They even wore my denim jacket because I'm a out there Jesus freak. Is there any room for boasting? The answer really is no. There's no room to boast for us who are following Jesus Christ. In fact, no person is justified by doing good things. It's impossible to stand in a right relationship with God by doing anything good. The Bible wants to encourage us not to think that way. It's wrong thinking according to the Bible. But a person is only justified, made righteous, nothing to do with Hungry Jacks, by faith, by trusting Jesus, not by doing any great deeds, which takes me to this place where we have the cat wearing weird clothes. Yeah, tough cat. And it's the question here that I'm posing is justified by faith. How does this work? And this is what I really want to encourage you with before you go to pod groups. How does justified by faith work? How is a person made right before God without having to do any good deeds, without having to do any good things? How does that really work? So we do nothing at all that's good, and yet we can be in a right stand with God? Let me explain. In Romans chapter 4 tonight, that's what we're up to. And how about we give a round of applause for Jess? He did a great job outside last week. Hey. Next Friday, we have this amazing speaker all the way from America, South America, and he'll be speaking for the superhero night. So you bring your friends along. He's going to knock your socks off. Abraham. I need to tell you about this guy, Abraham. He is a father figure in the Bible. Hands up if you've heard the name Abraham from the Bible guy. Excellent. See, most of us are saying, you don't know him? You poor fella. I'm going to tell you about him. Everyone can go home now. I'll just leave that person. No. Stay here. Abraham did not become an important figure in the Bible because he did great things, okay? That's really important to notice. He didn't become this famous person because he did great things. Abraham simply believed that God could keep God's promise, the promise that God had made to Abraham, and this is what made him famous. He's an ordinary bloke. In fact, he's far from ordinary to the place where he's extremely ordinary. May I say that's a nice way to say, man, he's a nobody. Okay? So you and I can say, hey, we're like Abraham because we're a room full of nobodies. Is that true? Okay. I'll leave that one with you. Hey, it says this, okay? The simple act of believing God gave Abraham a righteous standing with God. He was in a right relationship with God just because he believed. So the big question before, how does this justified by faith work? I'm going to unpack that for you very quickly. Trust God, and that equals righteousness. Trust God, that equals righteousness. But what did God promise Abraham? That's what I'd be asking if I was in your shoes. What did God, big God in the sky, who has all this power to do anything he wants, what did he promise itty-bitty little tiny Abraham on planet Earth? Well, let me explain. He promised him that he'll make him a great nation. He promised him that he'll make Abraham's name never forgotten, in fact, very, very famous. He promised him that he'll protect Abraham wherever he went, and everyone will be blessed through Abraham. In other words, anyone who walks on planet Earth, in fact, anyone who gets born and walks on planet Earth will be protected and blessed because of Abraham. That's the promise. I mean, these are mega big promises, okay? You don't normally walk down the park and all of a sudden God says, hey, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make you a great name. I'm going to protect you wherever you go. And whoever walks on planet Earth is going to be blessed because of you, Christian Aguilera. That never happens. But it happened to Abraham, okay? But let me tell you something. In Genesis 12:1-3, I don't make this stuff up. I'm going to read this passage to you. The Lord had said to Abraham, that was his name, Abram, before it became Abraham, which means many nations. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people and your father's house, and to the land I'll show you. Verse 2, it says, I will make you into, I've highlighted all the promises, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. So no one's going to do you wrong. Everyone's going to do you good. And all people on the earth will be blessed through you. See? I'm blessed because of Abraham. It will happen. And it's legit. Everyone knows Abraham's name just about. Now, interesting. This is an interesting fact. Interesting about Abraham. God said to him, he will make him a great nation. You probably didn't know. He married a woman who was barren. In other words, she couldn't have children. No matter what they tried, they couldn't have children. She couldn't have a child. The next thing is, God promised Abraham he'll give him a great name. He was not a wealthy person, and he was not an influential person before God spoke to him. He was a no one. No one had heard even about the place he was called from. Haran. These are the places he moved from one place to another. The next thing, God said to him, I'm going to protect you, Abraham, wherever you go. When you read Genesis, chapters after chapter 13, you actually get to discover the man Abraham. Let me tell you, he's a very timid and frightened man. Abraham is afraid to travel, and he's afraid of foreigners. Every time he goes from one city to another, he thinks, oh, Sarah. Sarah's his wife. He goes, Sarah, you're pretty, and the king there's going to think that you're beautiful, and they're going to realize I'm your husband, and they're going to say, hey, you know that guy Abraham and his sexy wife, Sarah? Let's just kill Abraham and take his wife. And so he'll say, Sarah, you're my wonderful wife. Just pretend we're brother and sister. She goes, oh, Abraham, become man. Swallow some concrete or something. She doesn't say anything like that. She goes, yes, Abraham, whatever you say, I'll do that. But Abraham's a very frightened man. And so God had to do a lot of work to change this man's heart. And lastly, God promised this man everyone will be blessed through Abraham. But let me tell you a bit about Abraham. He had nothing to bless anyone with. In fact, he wasn't wealthy at all. So God had to do a revolutionary change in the life of this man to fulfill his promises in this man's life. In fact, if you think about it, Abraham's a lot like me, and maybe a lot like you. We're pretty much the same, although I haven't married a barren wife, because we have 2 children, but the rest is pretty much the same. Now, in Romans chapter 4, we learnt about Abraham just now, but we know Abraham believes God because God said to him, go, which I'm going to show you the verse in a moment, and Abraham went when God said go. He didn't say, oh, well, God, I don't have much, and my wife, she doesn't work. Like it doesn't work when we try for a baby. It just doesn't work, God. And, I'm pretty scared about everyone, and so it's not going to work, God. And what do I have to give to anyone, God? I think I'm not going to go. I'll just stay. You've picked the wrong person, God. Abraham says, okay, God, you're going to have to do something big here. I'll go. You say go, I'll go. It says there in Genesis chapter 12, verse 4, it says, so Abraham went as the Lord had told him to go to this promised place where he's going to receive all these things. So let's say we see that formula again. Trust God equals justified. Because what I'm trying to answer for you, how does justified by faith work? How does this work? Because you and I are living in the 21st century, not back when Abraham was living, but it's just the same God, same principles, and we need to learn something out of Abraham's life and what Paul is teaching us in Romans. Firstly, how does it work? It's itty-bitty writing for those who have really good sight. Number 1, God makes a promise to a person, in this case, Abraham. The next thing that happens, the person believes that God will keep the promise. So that's what happens between you and I. The third thing that happens is what happens to that person that receives the promise from God. That person has belief in God, and that turns into trust, and that turns into faith. And the fourth thing is really important. That person takes their faith in God, in God's promise, and acts on it. They start moving forward. Can I tell you, a lot of followers of Jesus, that's when they stop. They hear a promise from God. They believe that God can keep the promise. They will turn their belief into trust and their trust into faith, and then they just don't move. They do nothing. God says, go, and they go, I can't. Abraham did. Then God credits that person as a righteous or a justified person based on what they did with God's promises. It starts with God's promise and ends with God declaring that person justified. You look at that. It's very simple to follow. God makes a promise. God credits a person as a righteous or justified person because they moved and listened to God. We're coming up to the end of our talk tonight, and I love for our worship team, or Will, to come up, our music team to come up. So the challenge of Abraham's story is this. He had to trust God. Now that seems simple, but you and I, in your big world and my big world, or you may think it's little, you and I have to trust God, just as Abraham did. He had to sacrifice his life. Let me explain what that means. He probably had his plans. You know how old Abraham is when God talks to him to go? The Bible tells us he's 75 years old. And his wife is like 62 or something. I don't know do you know many 62-year-old women who've actually fallen pregnant? You know when she falls pregnant? She's almost 100 years old. And it takes all those promises fulfilled 30 years later when Abraham is an old man and 100. So if you keep coming to youth, even though you're 40 and 50 and I'll be 100, we can talk about Abraham. But Abraham is an old man, and these promises come to pass. He had to sacrifice his life. He probably had plans with Sarah. We're going to buy this shop, and we're going to do this coffee shop and serve this Turkish delight thing and all these wonderful things and have this funky Turkish Egyptian music every night. And Sarah goes, yeah. And then God says, Abraham, I would like you to leave, and I'm going to give you all these things, but if you go. So he had to sacrifice these plans and accept God's plans and move forward. As he did move forward, let me tell you, billions of people have been blessed by his faith. Do you see that? You and I know about him, and the Bible in Romans 4 talks about that we are all children of Abraham because those who have trusted Jesus Christ said, Jesus, I'm a sinner. I admit I'm a sinner. I believe that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and I call out to you, rescue me, Jesus. You are just like Abraham is saying, God, I'm going to step out in faith. And you've come out at a camp or here at youth on a Friday night, you've put up your hand, and we've encouraged you to keep following Jesus. But now God has got something for you to do, just like God had something for Abraham to do. What Abraham was going to do, he was going to serve. And today, like Abraham, we can serve God by serving others. And so tonight, I want to challenge you from the Bible. Many of us, over 47 teenagers this year, have come to faith in this life, in this youth at Northreach Youth. I mean, that's amazing. 46. So that means there's a lot of followers of Jesus Christ sitting right here. But let me tell you, there's very few of you who are actually involved in something, in serving God in somewhere. This is your youth. This is not my youth or any of the leaders' youth. This is your youth group. And I want to teach you how you can turn this group into, so you can say, this is my youth group, your youth group. You need to put up your hand to serve God in some area.